That was a nice move by Pipkins, taking it right to the rack himself. Wide open three, left wing, and it's good. Nylon, the dunk likes that, Matt.
A three from the right side, and it's good! The one, Pipkins, the man, yet again.
Hello and welcome to The Flex. I'm Matt St. Jean, joined as always by Joe Howie, and we have a special guest on with us, Jake Zimmer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. You guys do a great job. I've got tough shoes to fill following Big East digital reporter and Fox commentator John Fanta, but I'm going to try my best, give my 2 cents, and hopefully it's valuable in some way, shape, or form, right?
Certainly big shoes to fill. We all love John Fanta around here, but I think you'll fill in all right. Let's just jump into the starting five here. We got Providence taking on Creighton this Saturday at Alumni Hall. Friars are 7-3, Creighton 7-2. They're ranked number 11 in the country. These two teams split the games last year, two very entertaining ones. What's changed since last season? Jake, you're the guest. I'll let you go first.
Well, it's an honor. I get to go first. It's not really having a last name that starts with Z. I'm usually last, so that's perfect. It's an unfamiliar spot for me, but here we go. So what's changed since last year, right? Both teams have undergone some pretty significant changes. I think that's certainly no secret at all. Providence, for one, was far more of a rounded out team than they really have ever been, right? Bunch of veteran leadership, a bunch of places that they had filled in the gaps with transfers or freshmen or newcomers or people that have made leaps and bounds. So that's certainly what comes to mind for me for Providence. I think this year, there's no secret at all, right? You guys have talked about this plenty of times. This is a very top-heavy Providence team. David Duke and Nate Watson are pretty much contributing to, I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, but it's got to be a big chunk of this Providence offense here. So that's definitely
Just
something to keep
half.
your eye on. And then we look at Creighton, right, who, again, has national rankings. They're one of the best teams in the nation. Certainly going to give Villanova a run for their money, and the best team in the Big East this year, but they fascinate me. This team fascinates me because I think the biggest change with this Creighton team is somehow Marcus Zegarowski got better. He was great last year. He was, he had his accolades as far as the conference all-team player goes, but he's somehow gotten even better. He's a better shooter. He's a better passer, and he's a better communicator. He's a better teammate. You ask Greg McDermott, and he'll say the same thing and corroborate all of that, really. So, I think this is a very dangerous Creighton team once again. They play some pretty good defense, but most importantly, they move the ball very quickly. We're going to talk about that a lot today, but I think that's what's changed from last season, guys.
Joe, what's your assessment?
Yeah, I agree completely with what you brought up there, Jake. I'm going to start with Creighton here and Zegarowski. I think he is definitely improved. I watched him play, and I wish we had him on our team. He is the ultimate point guard package, if you will, and I think him and Mitch Ballack present the toughest 1-2 punch to prep for in the entire Big East. I mean, those two guys are lights out. Mitch Ballack is basically launching threes from half court. It's a lot of fun to watch, but I'm sure if you're on the other end of it, you hate it. I think that changes for them. And defensively, there's no Tyshawn Alexander. And the argument can be made, and I've said this 100 times on this podcast, that he was the best on-ball defender in the Big East last season. I think when you look at their matchup in David Duke, that presents a huge hole because Duke has the size advantage over Zegarowski, whereas, you don't want Mitch Ballack, who's a little less athletic, more of a wing to guard David Duke. So I think Creighton's got their work cut out for them there. For Providence, I mean, the thing that strikes me from last season to this season is the 1 and the 5 spot. Last season, you had Lawan Pipkins and Malik White, who were more of scoring point guards than table-setting point guards, running the point with Duke sprinkled in a little bit. Now you have Jared Bynum, who's more of a traditional point guard. We've seen a lot this season that when he is on and he is dishing the ball out, Providence typically plays pretty well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see him in action against, a really good team like Creighton, and Nate Watson at the 5. You're looking at the transition from Khalif Young, who logged a majority of 5 minutes last season, to Nate Watson, who has just been a complete powerhouse, a force in the paint, just imposing his will on a lot of these smaller teams and undersized five men that he's been playing. So I think that's the biggest change for Providence.
I think you
Joe,
guys hit. Go ahead.
Yeah, Matt, if I can, I think Joe made a great point just now too. Tyshawn Alexander is another big hole that Creighton's kind of not really stumbling to fill because they certainly have the depth. They have the speed, they have the offensive schematic help and the prowess to make up for it. But he was one of the best on-ball defenders in the nation last year. I think you're exactly right. He had really no problem at all carving up whatever offensive threat was thrown his way. I mean, he handled Colin Gillespie for most of the time that he was on him at Villanova, of course. And then you had guys like Kamar Baldwin, who he shut down. And he even gave the Friars a little bit of a tough time, too. So, again, that's a big hole that Creighton has to fill. I think they're, not really having any problems doing it for sure, but losing one of the best on-ball defenders in the Big East. Clearly, I think, top 3 in the Big East, maybe top 5, top 10 in the nation last year. That's a big, big point about this Creighton team that, they haven't necessarily been able to fill yet.
You guys are spot on there. Both of these teams losing their kind of star point guards from last year. You lose Alexander, you lose Pipkins, but that right there is going to pave the way for the next guys. This brings us to point number 2. I know Friartown has been talking about this. David Duke for Big East Player of the Year. On the other side, you have Marcus Zegarowski, who is the preseason Player of the Year in this conference. I'm very excited to watch these two battle it out. Joe, who do you think is going to take round 1 of this fight?
You want my unbiased opinion?
Bring it on, man.
Personally, I think David Duke is the outright better guard. I know that's a heavy statement to make, especially against a player like Zegarowski, so just hear me out for a second. I think Duke is longer and a little more versatile. You can use him at different positions, whereas Zegarowski, it seems like Creighton is playing him solely at the 1, but even at the 1, he still scores in high volumes, which is something that Duke has yet to do. Duke is putting up a lot of points, but he's not really shooting the ball as much as a Zegarowski or even, for comparison, a Marcus Howard type of point guard from last season. Duke can play bigger. Zegarowski typically plays smaller. I think Providence is building on a lot of momentum here with David Duke. He scored in double figures every single game this season, and I just think that the momentum is in his favor. I think he owns the size advantage. I'm sure Ed Cooley has already scouted David Duke to guard Zegarowski for the entirety of the game, maybe minus a minute, the 1 minute that he's on the bench. But I think Duke should take this matchup. Any thoughts, comments?
Jake, this is all you.
Yeah, guys, this is a very intriguing situation here. I think this is the first glimpse that we've really seen all year between two potential Player of the Year candidates, right? The matchups have been pretty good so far. You look at Providence's schedule. Obviously, they had the tough loss to Butler. The 2 overtime games against DePaul and Seton Hall were very good. And, really the closest you could argue to having a potential Big East Player of the Year matchup would be David Duke and Mamu. But even so, they don't really play the same position. And, they have different playing styles and all that good stuff. So I think this is going to be the most pure of the matchups that we've seen in league so far. Listen, guys, I think that this, there are 2 things that jump out to me in this David Duke versus Marcus Zegarowski matchup here. The first being that we have to keep in mind Marcus Zegarowski might not, and the key word is might, be 100% for this. Now, people forget he had a surgically repaired knee and ended up missing a little bit of the playoffs last year, or what should have been the playoffs anyway, before it was prematurely cut short. It's been very clear from the Creighton coaching staff, from the media, that while he's ready to play and that he's ready for game speed reps, he's not entirely there yet. He's not 100%. So that's one thing to think about. And then number 2, having said that, I think this is the right time for Providence to have this matchup, right? If you're going to want to play a potential Player of the Year, you're going to want to do it while he's not 100%. His career field goal percentage, we're talking Marcus Zegarowski, coming into the year from inside the arc. So any 2-point field goal percentage, 53%. You know what it is this year? It's 43. So he's taking less shots and he's also making less shots right now. So this is going to be a very telling matchup, guys. David Duke, we've heard Ed Cooley, one of the best defenders in the league, hardest working player he's ever coached. The leadership skills have improved drastically, and so far, it's translated into good offense and defense, right? I mean, he's scored double figures in every single game he's played so far. He's had phenomenal defense. He just put up 13 rebounds against Butler. I think by my count, that's correct. But that's nothing short of incredible, to be honest with you. So I think we're going to get a sneak preview of it here. I do think, if you were to play this game right now, Duke's got the upper hand, but we're going to have to see when it comes around in a couple of weeks how Marcus Zegarowski is doing.
Yeah, Zegarowski is not posting the stat line this season that you would expect. Duke has him beat in points and rebounds. Zegarowski only has the edge in assists. He's fourth in the Big East, averaging 5 assists per game. I say only lightly, but 13.8 points per game. He's second for the Blue Jays, 4 rebounds per game. He's a do-it-all guard, but those are not the numbers that you would expect from the guy who's the best player in the conference. Now, we could talk about the guards all day with this matchup, but I think we should move on to the number 3 in our starting 5, which is really about Nate Watson and Creighton's small ball. We all know Creighton likes to play with a lot of small guys out on the court. They're going to beat you with speed, passing, and shooting, and still disciplined defense. Nate Watson might be the hardest to defend, the strongest big man in the conference right now. And I mean, if not for David Duke, Nate Watson's kind of in your Big East Player of the Year conversation this year. He's put up ridiculous numbers. Is Creighton's small lineup going to have an answer for Nate Watson, Jake?
That's a great question, and I find it funny that we're kind of saying that this Creighton team is undersized, because you want to hear something crazy. This is the biggest they've really been in the past few years, right? This team is certainly deep, and that Creighton typically has, a deep team that plays fast, that is going to run around. They're going to have a high pace. They're going to try to run you out of the stadium, right? But you look at these guys and some of their depth, I mean, it's like, it's insane. It almost doesn't feel like a Greg McDermott team. So yes, they are undersized, but they've been the biggest they've ever been, really. So I think Greg McDermott has at least trying to have been giving some guys some looks, right? The name that jumps out is a 7-footer Rushman, Ryan Kalkbrenner. He's been swatting some guys around. So, obviously anytime a 7-foot freshman comes on the floor, you're going to want to play him as much as you can. Certainly could be a factor this game. I think his strengths are that he's, obviously he's enormous, right? He's 7 feet. He's bigger than most of the guys in the Big East, probably besides Qudus Wahab, who is really up there in, in Georgetown, of course. And he's going to provide that traditional 5-spot support, right? You don't have a lot of teams going that route. You don't have Creighton going that route, 95% of the time for sure. So although Ryan Kalkbrenner's not going to start, he's going to be a factor because he's going to provide that 5-spot support, and he also scores a lot for the minutes that he plays. He's not playing a lot. He's, usually averaging a little bit less than half the game, but I mean, he's scored double figures in, I believe it's 4 or 5 games to this point. So definitely something to keep your eyes on. I think his weaknesses are certainly prevalent, which is interesting. He's very raw. He's not phenomenal defensively for having a 7-foot, 235 frame, and like I said, McDermott's a little bit hesitant to send him in for more than half the game, and rightfully so. That's not really Greg McDermott's style, where he's going to throw the 5 biggest guys on the floor and just let you grind it out with them. No, he's going to try to run you out of the ballpark, and for those reasons, I think size is certainly going to be a factor. I think they're going to play undersized most of the game, but leaves a gaping hole for Nate Watson and whatever power forward wants to show up for the Friars, which we'll get into at some point, of course. But I think those are certainly some things to think about.
Joe, you got a rebuttal over there?
Yeah, so I was scouting Kalkbrenner as well. I think those are some great points there, Jake, that you brought up about him. So I won't go too deep into him. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the guy that they have starting at the quote-unquote 5 spot is Christian Bishop, who comes in
Yeah,
at
they've been sending
6'7".
Bishop out there, and Bishop has been. He was the guy last year too. I think they tried to mix Kelvin Jones in there, who's no longer with the program, obviously, but and Jones was a guy that was 6'11". He wasn't in the spotlight. He was not a guy that was, getting alley oops from Marcus Zegarowski every game like Nate Watson and David Duke are. Right? It's that simple.
Yeah. So I think in terms of offensive for the Friars, Nate Watson owns this matchup. If Bishop is your starting 5 and, Kalkbrenner comes in and gives some serious minutes, this reminds me faintly of a Seton Hall matchup that Nate went through just a short while ago, where you have a traditional 7-footer playing the 5, but you also have a versatile 4-man on the floor in Sandro Mamukelashvili and Ike Obiagu. Again, 2 completely different teams, but a similar matchup if you look at it from far away. I think Nate, really the toughest paint matchup that was, predicted for him at the beginning of the season would have been Mamu and Obiagu. I think Nate owned that matchup very well. That was a career night for him at the Prudential Center. I think if Bishop is going to be your starter, he's probably going to log some more minutes. He's a veteran. Kalkbrenner will definitely come in, and especially if Nate gets going and Creighton needs an answer for him in the paint, they will definitely put in the 7-footer to try and swat Nate. But I think, and I want to take a turn here, normally we're pretty high on Nate. I think defensively this is going to be an issue for Nate, because if you've got these, versatile 6'7", 6'8" guys on the floor, they're going to spread the floor a little more, and Nate is going to have to play defensively a little beyond his comfort zone, out around the three-point arc, around the mid-range. And that's not to say he's not a good defender, but Nate would definitely be advantageous to be defending in the paint, whereas if he's out on the three-point arc, someone's a little quicker than him can blow right by him for a quick bucket. So I think there's a give and take here. I think overall we hit the nail on the head here. The offensive matchup for Nate in the paint is advantageous here. I think Nate wins this out.
Well, that's going to segue us perfectly into our next point, number 4 in here. This Creighton offense, how do you slow them down? Joe, obviously, I don't think you see Nate Watson as the guy that's going to do that, but what else is Ed Cooley thinking here?
So I think tonight you throw Jimmy Nichols into the starting lineup, and I love that move. We talked about it in our previous podcast, but I think your 2 guys really that you need here on defense to show up are Duke and Nichols. Duke is a long defender. He can defend guys smaller than him. He can defend guys bigger than him. I think the epitome of that is Mamu Kelashvili was essentially backing him down into the paint at Seton Hall. Like, you had Duke guarding a 6'11" forward. That's crazy. But at the same time, I think Duke's going to have his hands full with Marcus Zegarowski. I think Jimmy Nichols is essentially going to play small. I think we're going to go with that Bynum, Duke, Gant, Nichols, Watson lineup, where you essentially have Gant and Nichols swapping at the 3 and the 4. I think Nichols is going to be tasked with Mitch Ballack. He's a bigger wing guard, and Nichols is very long. And if you want to disrupt Creighton, you got to disrupt their 3-point shooters. And I think of Zegarowski and Ballack off the top of my head. I mean, rightfully so. But Nichols and Duke have their hands full this weekend. And, going back to the paint, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Croswell, or even if we go small with Horkler at the 5. I think Providence is going to throw out a few defensive looks out there, but ultimately it's going to come down to Duke and Nichols.
Jake, your thoughts?
It's a couple interesting points there, and I think, this matchup, to kind of back up here, is going to be a very intriguing one, for better or for worse, for the Friars. I think is yet to be determined, right? We'll find out on Saturday. But generally speaking, you slow down a very run and gun offensive team by getting out to a big lead, right? You got to score as many points as possible and hope you beat the other team, right? That is not the case for the Providence Friars. The Providence Friars do not win games like, in a run and gun. I think the only games where they really score over 80 points are where they're playing a quad 4 team like Fairfield, or they didn't even crack that mark against Fairleigh Dickinson, believe it or not. So it was a 79-67 win, a 12-point margin. That's I could go on a rant about that for an entire podcast episode, but they don't even crack 80 points against a team like that. You want to know why? That's because Fairleigh Dickinson, kind of plays in the same way that, on much different scales, the way that Creighton does, right? They're very fast. You got a lot of shooters on the team, right? So I think we learned a little bit about, what Providence's game plan is over the first couple of weeks of the season for sure. But ultimately, if you look at the game, I believe, I can't remember the exact date, but it was at the Dunk the last time they played, February 2020. 73-56 final. Providence was not up for most of that game. As you may recall, they were down at halftime, and then absolute barrage of three-pointers came in the second half. They got lucky. To be honest with you, A.J. Reeves was on that night, and they played good enough defense to hold off Creighton for the rest of the game. Creighton scored 20 points in the second half. That's a big testament to their defense. So I think what Providence needs to do is really plant their feet and slow them down, but they also need to make shots. That's the thing. If they don't score, then all of this is null and void. Because if they don't make shots, they are absolutely not going to beat Creighton. If they play like they did against Butler, forget about it. The first time, I should say. Dismal shooting, horrid looks. They kept shooting, which is normally okay when you've got that talent on the floor. All the good coaches will say, I want my shooters to shoot, rightfully so, but you don't want them to take double-teamed three-pointers like the Friars were doing all night. So the Friars need to score a lot of points. That just needs to be a prerequisite for winning this game, if you will. They also need to win the defensive battle.
Yeah, I think that's definitely your key here. Nobody is beating Creighton this season without scoring. They're averaging over 80 points a game at this point. I know one point in the last couple of weeks they were on pace to finish as the second highest scoring offense in Big East history. We'll see if that remains the case. Obviously, things will only get tougher from here for the schedule. But this is certainly a high-powered offense. For number 5 in our starting 5, I want to take things back a little bit, take a look at the history between these two teams. You mentioned that game at the Dunk last year. The Friars kept racking up threes at the end. The game before that comes down to the wire. You've got the Big East tournament game back in 2018. Friars coming back from down double digits, taking them to overtime. Earlier that season, you've got the Isaiah Jackson, I believe it was Kyron Cartwright. The pass is from Isaiah Jackson on the game winner. And you can go back to the first year of the new Big East. These two teams met in the first new Big East championship, with Providence taking that one. And these are two rabid fan bases. Jake, is this a rivalry?
Man, you know what? When you threw this question out there, I really had to look into that. First of all, were you guys at the Dunk last year for the 73-56?
We were.
Oh, yes.
I think there are maybe 2 Providence games that had a better environment. Actually, no, just one. I think the one Providence game that might have had a better environment last year was the back and forth against Xavier. They just barely pulled it out. That was one of the best basketball games I've ever seen in my life in person. And the best atmosphere that I've ever felt at the Dunkin' Donuts Center was that 73-56 win. So much on the line. Providence was kind of teetering between, they were still out of the woods. They had some nice wins at that point after that dismal start, but the doubters were still there. They still said, all right, this is Creighton. This is going to be a big, big test for them. Zegarowski's playing. Alexander's playing. This doesn't look really good. And then they just lit it up, right? This is a rivalry. This is absolutely a rivalry. PC leads 10, they've won 10 to Creighton's 8 overall. 5 of those wins are at home. They've only lost twice at home. PC just came off in that win the largest margin of victory in the series history, 73-56. And then just under half of them have been by single digits, too. So these are not blowouts, typically. This is, for the most part, close games. So I think, if we see Providence win again, I think we've got our answer. I think this is certainly a rivalry because then you got to start talking, well, how many times has PC upset Creighton, right? Creighton's been nationally ranked for, a couple of years, or at least in the conversations for sure. But, I mean, when push comes to shove, I certainly think this is about as good as a Big East rivalry as you're going to get.
Joe, I know we were students there for 4 years. You got to feel it in person all the time with the students and the fan base. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Coming off of my senior year as the president of Fire Fanatics, the student fan base, whatever you want to call it, this is definitely a rivalry. Jake, I think you hit the nail on the head with using that final game at the dunk against Creighton last season as kind of the cap to this. I think no one in the building was more excited to watch them beat Creighton than I was. But man, that was an electric atmosphere, especially after Marcus Zegarowski hit that buzzer beater 3 in Omaha to beat us on David Duke's 36-point performance. I mean, we had that game won, and we were still young at the time. We were still, shaking out who we were, and he just ruined it. That was a career night for Duke, and he just ruined it. So I still hold that. I still have a little grudge against that, if you can't tell by my voice. But
well, and you can't forget, Joe, that was a back and forth game, that 78-74. It was a dogfight, and it literally went to the last possession. That game was still up in the air. You had a packed house in Omaha, and then it erases a 36-point performance from David Duke effectively. And that's kind of the point in the season that you could argue that was a turning point for the season for the Friars. Because, again, you talk about trying to erase the dismal 7-6 start. You have a couple of wins, some good, I guess, quote unquote cakewalk games. They took care of Georgetown. They got their loss, to Villanova and Butler out of the way early at home. But I mean that's electric. That's an electric loss, unfortunately, right? But that is what it is. The emotions are high, and then Providence returns the favor and whops them the next time around. I think that's a rivalry.
I think the Friars definitely poured on a couple extra threes that they didn't need to shoot at the end of that home one too.
Well, if you ask Ed Cooley, they might have. He might say they needed him, but
Reeves' step back at the end of that game was just. There was 20 seconds left, and Duke gives it to Reeves. Reeves a little step back 3, like, hey, thanks for coming.
That was one of those that you
send a moment style.
You could have heard Frank Carpano, the PA announcer, say, "Hey, Jay Reeves for 3." You could have heard that in Pawtucket. That was one of those. It was just resounding, and the whole crowd was like,
that was a great
"Oh my God, what happened to him? Why is he all of a sudden deciding to be good?" Right?
Well, that's a question we've been asking ourselves for quite a while about AJ Reeves. But we could do 3 podcast episodes talking about him. I think we should move things down here, wrap up the starting 5, and we'll go off the bench. What's coming off the bench for you, Joe?
So, Jake, you actually teed me up perfect to my off the bench point. I want to compare this matchup against Creighton to where we were when we first took on Creighton last season. I think last season we were a game ahead. We were 4-1. Our only Big East loss was to, ironically, Butler at the time. Now we're 3-1 with our only Big East loss to Butler before hosting Creighton. Now we traveled to Creighton. We're hosting Creighton. So, I mean, just to reiterate what we just talked about, David Duke at 36 points. It was a rock fight. Marcus Zegarowski erased the 36-point performance by David Duke. Now let's set the stage. David Duke and Marcus Zegarowski are serious contenders for Big East Player of the Year. We already painted the narrative that Zegarowski's coming off a knee injury, isn't playing as efficient as he has in years past, yet is still lights out for them. David Duke is, he's definitely on the rise. Anyone who's nationally aware of college basketball can see that David Duke is improving, and he is the leader of this team. I think that where we were last season playing this game to where we are this season playing this game, although similar in scheduling and record, I think this game holds a lot more weight this season for us than it did last season. Last season, we had that abysmal non-conference. I mean, we did not deserve to win that game. And I know that sounds tough coming from a Providence guy, but if anyone nationally was watching that game, they're like, oh, that's a win for Creighton. Creighton's ranked. Providence, dropped games to Long Beach State, Charleston, Penn, URI, they're not good. So no one expected us to win that game. We went in, and this, like you said, was a turning point. This, I think it was a 3-game skid for us. Creighton, Seton Hall, Villanova, all ranked teams. We were not playing well against them. But it was a turning point because we had to pick ourselves up and look ourselves in the mirror and say, who do we want to be? I think at this point in this abbreviated season, we're a little farther along in where we want to be. We know who our 2 guys are, Duke and Watson. We know that those guys can score, and they can score heavy night in and night out. I will say the thing we need to look in the mirror is A.J. Reeves, because I think he's going to be a huge X factor here too. The second time we played Creighton, he was lights out, 22 points, 6 of 8 from three-point land. He's been pretty good the past 2 games. I mean, he had the great performance against DePaul, another pretty good performance tonight. I think it's going to come down to him. And this is my off the bench point, is that although in terms of big picture, there's a lot of weight to this game, I think that, when you compare it to last season, this game is going to be completely electric.
That if this was being played at the Dunk with a full crowd, this is an environment you would not want to miss.
Stop, Matt. Stop.
I know, but you were saying big picture in there, Joe. Jake, I know you want to go big picture with your off the bench. Hit us with it.
Yeah, my off the bench is not. It doesn't have a direct correlation to this game, but I think we can tie the loose ends here. I was in a few Twitter conversations with very loyal followers and some members of the cutthroat New York sports media about Nate Watson, and we don't need to talk about how good he is and how important he's going to be for this offense this year, but I do want to make the point that Nate Watson's improvement is something that we've seen before, believe it or not. And I know you guys have made this comparison before, but I looked into this today. His improvement this year from junior to senior year is just about as close to Ben Bentel's jump from his freshman to sophomore year from 14-15 into 15-16, right? You look at a guy like Ben Bentel, 6'8", got a chip on his shoulder. He was never the NBA touted prospect, if you will. He was going to be a solid contributor for Ed Cooley, get some solid minutes, probably earn his way up to a starting spot. But then all of a sudden, from freshman to sophomore year, he goes from 6.4 points per game to 21.1. That's a big leap right there. He goes from 4.9 rebounds a game to 7.7. And his field goal percentage goes up, right? It goes up from around 43% to just under 47 here. The bottom line, that Ed Cooley's comments after were very similar to the way he's talking about Nate Watson. He has made leaps and bounds. He even called Nate Watson that dude this year. I'm pretty sure he said that about Ben Bentel too. He's that dude. I don't doubt it. Somebody fact check me, please. I'd love to hear if Ed Cooley's called Ben Bentel that dude, but I'd be shocked if he didn't, right? Nate Watson, you look at, it's kind of the same thing. 9 points a game last year to 19. 4.6 rebounds a game to 7. He's improved his shooting percentage. I think this is the kicker here, from 51.1% last year. First of all, he's making over 50% of his shots. It's really good. To 61.5. He is up to 10%. He's increased his shots made by more than 10%. He's also playing a lot more, too. He averaged 18 minutes a game last year, and he's playing most of them now right with Duke. I think he had, 40 out of the, 40, actually probably 50, 40 out of the 50 minutes that were possible in the DePaul game. I think Nate Watson was in, and rightfully so. So how is this going to translate to this game? I think these high percentage looks to kind of put everything, to put a bow on everything we talked about with, the size and the rebounding and the scoring. I think high percentage looks are going to be huge in a game where size is going to be at a premium. And that's probably only on Creighton's side. We're going to have to see if Greg tries to run him out of the stadium again, but you got to think he's going to throw his bigger guys in. at some point. So those high percentage looks are going to be big. And then Watson drawing that attention, if they do say, all right, Nate is scoring too many points, we need to put some more bodies on him. Well, guess what? If you've got 3 guys over 6'8" in the lineup, that's a perfect time for A.J. Reeves. That's a perfect time for David Duke to widen out his range and go beyond the arc. Hell, maybe even Greg Gant makes a couple of threes. I don't know. Crazier things have happened, right? So I think Bentel and Watson, we can learn a lot about Nate Watson from Ben Bentel, and I think that, the way that Ed Cooley and this coaching staff and the teammates are talking about him, it's a very, very similar comparison here.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been one we've been making all season long. I don't think you can sing too many praises of Nate Watson for the jump that he has made this season and just the skill of his game, the strength that he plays with. He's got to be one of the most improved, if not the most improved player in the Big East this season.
And don't forget, he has the coolest dad in the face
country.
of the earth, too.
Yeah, Big Papa Watson.
Yeah, he's very active on Twitter.
I wish I had a cheerleader like Mr. Watson. I really do.
I think we all wish we had that. I mean, he's something special. He's a force to be reckoned with on social media. I've gotten put into the Nate Watson's dad jail a couple times for tweeting negative things about Nate.
That's not a place you want to be. No,
it's not. It's not. So I'm sure that he's going to be very
negative things about Nate.
I've learned. I think he's going to be very happy if he listens to this and hears what we had to say. So if you're listening,
I would
thank you.
Hope so.
All right, let's talk specifics. We're going to wrap things up here. We'll go to X Factor, and if you want to make your prediction with this, you can. Jake, I'll let you open this up. Who's your X Factor for this game, and who takes it?
All right, guys, there's 9 billion different routes we can go with the X Factor. I think there's, to win against Creighton, every guy on this Friars roster has to show up. Every single one of them has to be on their A game. But I think one guy that I want to see a lot more out of, and I think is actually going to be a really, really important factor here, is Jared Bynum. Jared Bynum is a very interesting case here. He was the guy over at St. Joe's for Phil Martelli. He was scoring a lot. He was the rah-rah guy. He was the leader on that St. Joe's team, even among seniors and juniors and more tenured guys. Jared Bynum was a guy that people looked at and wanted to be the guy. They wanted Jared Bynum to be the leader on that St. Joe's team. Here's the thing. Jared Bynum does not have to be the guy on this team. In fact, he doesn't need to be the superstar or this great lauded Providence Friar guard. He just needs to be a point guard. He does not need to be a Chris Dunn. He doesn't need to be a Bryce Cotton. Hell, he really doesn't even need to be a Lawan Pipkins, right? All he needs to do is facilitate the offense. We know he can do it. We know that he's got the basketball intangibles. If you ask Ed Cooley and you ask Jeff Battle and you ask the rest of the staff, Bob Walsh will corroborate that too. Jared Bynum is a very, very smart guy that has a lot of basketball intelligence. They need him to start acting like it. Providence wins when Bynum passes the ball well. He had 8 assists against Seton Hall and TCU and Fairfield, too. He had 5 assists against Davidson, 4 against DePaul. Those are all wins. He does not need to be phenomenal. He needs to facilitate the offense. He needs to be comfortable making those tough passes. And he needs to be entirely comfortable with running this team and barking out instructions to David Duke and Nate Watson like he's been there before. All right? He does not need to be phenomenal. He needs to be a point guard. And I think that if he passes the ball well and he does that against a Creighton team that has certainly no shortage of guys that are better than him, then this is going to be fine. Then Providence is going to be fine, and they're going to win this ball game. I really do think that. So, I think it's about creating opportunities for Duke and Watson, and it's about the performance of the front court. Absolutely essential. So, you can freeze and cold takes me if you want. 75-70 Providence is the prediction for now. I do think it's going to be on the slower side if Providence executes well. If not, this could get ugly fast in Creighton's favor.
All righty. Well, you heard it from Jake there. He's got the Friars taking this one by 5. Jared Bynum is the guy. What do you say, Joe?
Well, first off, I just want to build off Jake's point. I think that's a really great point you made about Jared Bynum, especially at the end there. He doesn't need to do anything spectacular. He just needs to be a point guard. And I think that works hand in hand with David Duke, because what we've been seeing right now is sort of the two of them sharing that position. And I think if you can move Duke off the ball and let Bynum facilitate the offense, Duke's scoring is going to go through the ceiling. I mean, because right now he's doing a little of everything, and rightfully so, because he can and he has the ability to. But if we move Duke to a strictly shooting guard position and you let Bynum take over the 1, I think that's going to be an exciting thing for Friar fans. But I won't dwell on that too much. For me, the X factor is Nate Watson. We talked about this in the starting 5, and I still think that we own the size advantage in the paint with Nate Watson. If Creighton's starting center is 6'7", and we've got 6'10", 260 out there, on paper, I mean, in the gym, wherever you are, pick up basketball. That the size is going to win. Not to mention Nate is having the best season of his life. I mean, he's putting up career numbers. He's playing basically the entire game. And the way his composure in the paint is so different compared to seasons past. In seasons past, you've seen him, get the ball and spin around with that little hook shot. The hook, we used to love that his sophomore year. The hooks, we would yell in the student section. Now you're seeing Nate, he's taking mid-range jumpers. He's finding guys, he's finding guys and going to the ball. He's not just waiting there for the ball to come to him, which I love. I think if you can get Nate going, Creighton is not going to have an answer for him. You can put in Kalkbrenner at 7 foot. You can put in Bishop. You can put in whoever you want on him. Nate has the experience and the size advantage in the paint. I don't think Creighton is going to have an answer for him. My prediction, I think it's going to be a little bit of a more high-scoring game. What I think of when I think of this game is transition defense. We talked a lot about how Creighton's a run-and-gun team, and games that I think of when I think of Providence transition defense are Fairleigh Dickinson, Alabama, and Indiana. And we can go as far back as the Maui Invitational. We won't dig that open too much, but Providence did not play good transition defense against Alabama and Indiana. That's basically why we lost those games, with a bunch of other factors, but transition defense was sloppy at best. And even against Fairleigh Dickinson in the first half, you saw that first possession, I remember this very clearly, no one got back on transition defense. FDU got a quick bucket, and Cooley took out the entire starting 5. Mm-hmm. I think if Providence wants to beat Creighton, transition defense is key. I think Providence will take it 81-78. It's going to be a high-scoring game because I don't think our transition defense is good enough to slow Creighton down. I think Creighton is still going to go out and they're going to put up a ton of points, but I think we're going to have to rely on our paint offense and essentially three-point shooting to dig us out of this one.
All right. I mean, you heard it there from Joe and Jake. That's pretty much everything you need to know. I'll add my 2 cents here. X Factor. I'm going to go a little bit different here. I'm going to go Greg Gant. He's an athletic wing who is coming off a subpar performance against Butler, only had 2 points, missed some free throws. A guy like him is going to have opportunities to step up because Creighton's going to divert its attention to David Duke and Nate Watson. He's going to get his opportunities on offense. He's going to have opportunities to shoot the 3, opportunities to rebound. He's athletic, so in transition, he's going to be huge, whether it be slowing down Creighton or scoring when the Friars are able to get the ball away from one of these Blue Jays guys. And on defense, he's lengthy and athletic. He can close out and make things difficult. You know that you can shut down Marcus Zegarowski or you can shut down Mitch Ballack, and Creighton can still beat you because everybody can score. You need everybody on the floor to play good defense, and a guy like Greg Gant is going to be essential to that when he's out there. I'm gonna go even lower scoring than both of you. I'm gonna go 70-65 Friars. They're coming off a good defensive performance. I think they're gonna keep that momentum going.
Okay.
That's interesting. Right, and you know, Matt, to make a point about Greg Gant, where the hell has he been? You know, he has had quite a disappointing start. I think I speak for all Friar fans when I say that, really, between I don't have to go into the front court troubles that we've had, but you talk about it's like who's going to step up and be the number 4 person, right? Gant's getting his shot. Horkler certainly had it. He looks totally lost and uncomfortable right now, and it'll come with time. But Croswell, he can't really compete as a 6th or 7th man. So, I mean, when's Greg Gant going to step up? And I think if it's not this game, then he's in some serious trouble, to be honest with you. I think
I'm not as worried about Gant. I think even with Nichols starting or Horkler starting, Gant was still seeing the most minutes at the 4. I think he does a lot of things that aren't reflected in the stat sheet. I think he's cleaned up his defense a lot since even the beginning of this season. I think he's just young and inconsistent. And he's going to have his really good games. He's going to have some of his bad games. Friars have kind of rotated whoever that 3rd or 4th scorer has been. I think it might be Gant's turn against the Blue Jays.
I hope so, because could be wide open if not. That's, I'll leave my gripe with Gant there because I think he's very athletic and I think he's got a lot of raw potential, but I mean, my goodness, it really isn't reflected in the stat sheet. And I think that, for as equally great things as he's done, both sides of the ball, whether it's setting a good screen, taking a clutch charge, something like that, there have been equally as silly, dumb mistakes with turnovers and with errant passes and, passing the ball when he should be shooting it or shooting the ball when he should be passing it, right? So I think this is a very interesting point. Greg Gant really could be the X factor here too. Something to think about.
Yeah. We certainly will see.
I just want to build off that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. I'll let you take those, and then we'll end it there.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're closing down here. Just a quick note. I think that was a great point because Greg Gant has improved, and this is going off of what Jake just said. He's improved a lot on defense, and we're seeing a greater sense of urgency from him on defense. But again, the small mistakes are adding up. I think a part of Butler's late second half surge tonight, there was a point when Greg had the ball and you could see he was supposed to pass it to AJ, but AJ was smothered and Greg passed it to him anyway, forced a turnover, and AJ had to foul the guy in order to prevent a fast break. I think that is where Greg should hold the ball and slow things down. I think for comparison, in the post-game presser, the media was talking to Duke about the game slowing down for him. I don't think the game has slowed down at all for Greg. I think he's improved on defense, but I still think he sees things very, very quickly on the court, and he just needs to slow down. And this is just going to come with time and maturity. But I think as time comes, he will improve. But the small freshman mistakes that are kind of carrying over from last season need to start making their way out the door, or he's going to lose minutes to Nichols and eventually Horkler.
Yeah, we will definitely see. Tip-off for this one is at noon on Saturday, starting the new year off in style. Hopefully, this game will be on Fox for the world to see, if you will. Friars hosting Creighton. It's a ranked matchup for the Friars with number 11 Creighton coming into Alumni Hall, so it should be a good one. Jake, tell the people where they can find you.
Wow. Well, somewhere roaming the streets of Providence, for one. These days, I mean, you'd normally be able to find me at the Dunk. You could find me behind the microphone at Bryant games. I don't know why I'm plugging myself for those, but because can't the fans and all, COVID, fun. At Jake Zimmer on social media, or at Jake Zimmer 12, I should say. Wow, I get my own Twitter handle wrong. That's embarrassing. Jake Zimmer 12 on Twitter. You can follow me there, and of course, I would be remiss if I didn't plug at NCAA Hoops Digest too. Got a nice full slate of writers this year, a lot of Big East content and a lot of Big South content this year too. So very excited, and thanks for having me on, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming, and thank you all for listening. You'll hear from us again after the game. Make sure you follow us wherever you're listening so you can get that content. And as always, Joe,
go Friars. Hopefully we have a cool jersey reveal, but I don't think so. Go Friars.